Hi everyone, Darla back again to do another addictions class on video. Good news is that I hope in June we'll be able to start having some in-person classes as well, although they'll be very small and pod specific, so I think we're going to still keep the videos going for a while. Hopefully I will get to see people who I've missed for the past couple of months, and also meet some of the new people in jail, because you know, this time doesn't have to be a waste. It can be a time where you really focus on and work on yourself and do some changing. So we start our classes with 5 deep breaths. The purpose is to get us in a state of mindfulness, which means just paying attention to the here and now. Activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us calm down. Later it can be useful in urge surfing and dealing with cravings. So our job is just to follow our breath and then let other things just float by. So that there's a distraction, some noise, the food carts, whatever the deal is, we can just let those drift on by. So, and I watched a meditation person the other day, and she talks you through the breaths very nicely, but doesn't close her eyes and doesn't make herself look foolish by doing it. But for you, men and women, I will look like a fool, and I'm going to do the breathing with my eyes closed. So don't even worry about how you look doing it. Okay, so nice deep breath in. Hold at the top. Release very slowly. And again, you can pause at the bottom. Just focus on the feeling of the breath going in and out. In. And out. And in. And out. Even if you haven't done them up to this point, get to the last 2 with us. A deep breath doesn't hurt. In. And out. I didn't do as well in that one. Sometimes they don't come out really well. Keep trying. In. And out. Our topic today, is that any way to treat me? We're going to talk about treatment. So, treatment for addiction varies based on the setting, the modes, and the types or approaches of treatment. And I'm going to start out with a little story, because people often say, well, you know, does it work if I get court ordered into treatment? You know, if they order me there, it can't work. That's not necessarily true. Actually, there have been research studies, including some in Denver, showing that court-ordered people who commit to their treatment do just as well as voluntary people who commit to their treatment. Now, notice there's a part of that that definitely involves you. You can get court-ordered into treatment and have the attitude, well, they can order me to sit here, but they can't order me to change. And that is truth. So you can go through treatment, like when you get out, because your probation officer wants it, your parole officer wants it, the Department of Social Services wants it, whatever the deal, and you can get nothing out of it. Or you could say, hey, I got to be here anyways. What can I get out of it? Not just to make them happy, but what could I get out of it that might make me happy, or my family happy, or my children happy? It might make me have the kind of life I want. So one of my favorite stories about this is back when I worked at Alternatives to Family Violence, decades ago now. we had a perpetrators program as well. So when people would call in, our first question was, is this for voluntary or court-ordered treatment? And this one guy said voluntary. So I go through the sheet, and at the end we ask, how did you hear about our program? And he said, from the judge. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were coming voluntarily. And he said, oh, I am. He said, the judge said I could either go to jail or take these classes. So I volunteered to take these classes. Now, some people would be like, oh, but actually, I like his attitude, right? Okay, I have a choice here. I'm going to volunteer to do something. Maybe I'll get something out of it, right? So he didn't say, the judge ordered me, but he can't make me do anything. So that's one thing when we're looking at this. But setting just means where the treatment occurs. So it could be, correctional settings offer basically a lot of the mental health and rehab treatment in this country these days, unfortunately, because we have so many people incarcerated, and a lot of issues associated with it have to do with addictions. So correctional settings, jails, prisons, halfway houses, people on probation, parole, but settings could be, jails, prisons, halfway houses. There's also mental institutions. Those might be, locked or unlocked psychiatric facilities. Hospitals often have within them, either in the hospital or like on West Pines at Lutheran, a separate building that houses the mental health unit, so that can happen. And those can be locked or unlocked units. So you can have, 24-hour residential treatment, inpatient treatment. It can be what we call intensive outpatient, where you basically, spend the day in the program and then you go home to sleep at night and then you come back again. You can have outpatient treatment that might happen 1 to 3 or 4 times a week in a setting. So there's just different kinds of settings and different kinds of time periods associated with those. The tendency does tend to be moving towards shorter treatment based on money, and longer treatment's not always better. There used to be a bunch of movies, 28 days and all those kinds of things, because it used to be kind of the standard was that. And that's not really long enough to do comprehensive treatment, but it's also not as short as some of what we're looking at now. So when you think about inpatient treatment, usually what that's considered now is just a chance to kind of really get your feet wet, get things moving along, and then you have to follow up with some kind of aftercare. You have to, figure out, okay, now I'm leaving this place. And in fact, one of the most dangerous times for relapse is getting out of an institution, be that a prison, be that a jail, be that a mental hospital. So that aftercare planning is always important no matter what kind of treatment. Now the exception to that is some of the residential treatments like therapeutic community, which we'll talk about. Those tend to be longer term. The goal of a therapeutic community is we're going to have you actually live in this therapeutic community with these other people to kind of almost reprogram you, and it's going to be a longer program. They used to be 5 years, 3 years. Now they might be, several years. Examples of therapeutic communities, would be Pier 1 or The Haven, and we'll talk about those in a bit. So setting's one issue, and then modes of treatment can involve individual, group, couples and families, family groups, meaning more than one family meeting together. So some treatment centers, they'll have family days where all the families come of the people in the program, and that provides you with a time to, like, one family might be in the middle of the circle getting the treatment, and the other families are watching, and then you change turns on the hot seat. Because so many issues are similar or the same, you often learn a lot by watching other people. Some couples therapy is done that way too now. There's couples intensive where maybe 6 couples are going to meet for the weekend with trained therapists, and like one couple will be in the fishbowl and then the others have that happen. So there's different settings with families. And then in terms of who's running these sessions, this can be anything from peer counselors, people who've been through the same situation and have gotten a little bit of training. they might be running the situation, up to CACs, which can be people with high school diplomas for CAC 1 and some training, all the way up to licensed addictions counselors who have to have a degree in the field and go through the training and the supervision. So there's all kinds of levels of that. You can get professionals, myself, my degrees, my bachelor's and master's are in social work, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a registered nurse. Nurses also do therapy. It can be PhDs, psychology, it can be medical doctors. So there's a whole range of people, from peers to coaches to professionals of all types running these kinds of situations. Now, common types of therapy. We're going to go into some of the most common types of therapy, and on this particular video, I'm watching my timer, we are going to be talking about ones run by professionals. So that would be licensed therapists, that would be trained clinicians. So professional therapy, the kind that you'll probably hear most often, and if you get a certificate in this class, once we're back to that system, you'll see it talks about us having a cognitive behavioral component. Because cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be very effective, and it's an active form of therapy, and people actually make changes. What we don't want is a kind of therapy where you we don't want Woody Allen therapy, where you lay on the couch and you just go over and over and over stuff forever and ever, and you don't do anything with it, right? Because that's not change. We want therapy that actually can affect change in your life, that can, get you more of what you want, that can help you achieve your goals and your dreams. And if sobriety, recovery is one of your dreams, then that's what we're looking at in here. So cognitive behavioral therapy, what it is really in the title: cognitive thinking, behavioral, your actions, therapy. Now, it involves your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So you and your therapist, individually or in a group, will actually tune in to what are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What are my behaviors? How those things link together? What kind of patterns do I have? So you become aware, you explore, and then you look for patterns. And once you've looked for patterns, then you do what we call cognitive restructuring. You actually say, hey, all those thoughts I tell myself automatically, some of those might be distorted. As Daniel Amen says, the brain guy says, don't believe everything you say to yourself. Don't believe everything you think, because sometimes you lie to yourself. So we're going to turn the distorted ones into realistic thoughts, right? Not fantasy pie in the sky stuff, but realistic thoughts. And then we can look at our feelings and figure out ways to deal with feelings and figure out how to change our behaviors. And if I had a triangle up here, look at this, little hand signals. Each point on this triangle, it could be feelings, thoughts, and then over here, behaviors, right? You can enter this triangle from any of those points. I can change my behaviors, and if I consistently change my behaviors, my thinking is going to change, and my feelings are going to change. If I consistently work on my feelings, my thinking will start to change and my behaviors will start to change. And especially with this, if I change how I'm thinking about things, I will then have an effect on my feelings and an effect on my behavior. So that's what cognitive behavior therapy really works on. Now, it's very action-oriented. It's not just you sit down and say, yeah, I shouldn't think that anymore. No, you actually take a thought. We're going to do this in an upcoming video. You take a thought. First you pay attention, you write it down, you see what it is, and now you are going to cross out any parts that aren't true. You're going to keep the parts that are true. You're going to restructure negative or distorted things into something much more realistic, and then you're going to practice repeating that to yourself and saying, what if I behave based on this new thought, until that becomes part of your pattern. So it's a very active process. You may have a lot of homework in cognitive behavioral therapy because we want you actively applying this. This is very applicable. This isn't just I say, this is not you sitting on the couch watching the workout video. This is you actually getting up and doing the workout video. If you don't get the work or don't do the work, you won't get the results. The second kind, and we're going to go into this quite a bit because, again, this is one that a lot of people are saying, I got told I need to be in DBT, and I don't even know what that is, and there's this weird word in the title, and What? So, DBT stands for, I need to take a sip, fizzy water, seltzer water, dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. This was developed by a therapist in the Seattle area named Marsha Linehan in the 80s, and she was dealing with a group of people at the beginning, it's since been spread out to a lot of other people, who were called borderline personality disorders. And whether you have that or not, this therapy can be very useful for you. But the thing about borderlines was that they were very like labile and volatile. They shifted emotions very quickly. They had a hard time. They frequently felt overwhelmed by emotions, and often would do self-injuring or suicidal behaviors. Obviously, that's very concerning. And it seemed to be that a lot of traditional therapy didn't work very well with them. Now, I remember when I was young and naive, I had some clients who were labeled borderline, and we actually made quite a bit of progress. And then a supervisor said, well, you can't be making progress because we all know borderlines are just it was kind of like they're a lost cause. I remember thinking, well, if they're making progress and I'm a new therapist, I don't think they're a lost cause. Maybe because I was a new therapist, I hadn't gotten all jaded yet, right? But Marsha Linehan stepped in and said, no, we can actually work effectively with these people. And this, again, is one of the therapies that has stood the test of scientific research, that this actually does help decrease self-injuring behaviors, decrease suicidal behaviors, increase reports of satisfaction and happiness, increase interpersonal skills, skills with other people. So a lot of benefits to this form of therapy. So it is cognitive behavioral therapy because it deals with your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, but there's added psychosocial and emotional regulation components. So this really says, hey, we have to not just deal with restructuring our thoughts and those kinds of things, but we're going to have to build in some awareness and ability to deal with emotions. That's the emotional regulation. We also talk about that in compassion power when we get back to that class. So we're going to have to do that, and psychosocial behaviors, because part of people when and addictions is one of those situations, borderline, but any situation where maybe you were not raised in that, where you don't get certain social things, you might have to be taught social skills. Now people go, wasn't I supposed to learn that while I was growing up? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. And here's the other thing, your knowledge might be spotty. So I'm gonna give you an example. Someone called me just a few days ago, and someone was really excited. And he's a young man who's been working during this whole pandemic, and as in the food service industry. And his boss let him know that he and the other assistant manager of the store were getting these bonuses because of how well they managed things, how well they contained cost, how well they managed staffing. Just really praised him for it and gave them a monetary bonus. And so, he called excited. This was a relative. And so I was like, wow, that is really exciting and all that. Well, I get a call a few minutes later like, this is going to sound like a weird question, but I don't know this answer. Do I respond to his email? Right? And of course, the pro-social thing is, yeah, so I brainstormed with him, some things he might say. Thank you for, acknowledging the hard work we put in during this time. He and I really worked hard to make all this happen. And, not only the money, but your words are appreciated. That is a really appropriate thing to say back. But he said, I didn't learn these things. His mom abandoned the family when he was very young, and his dad was abusive. So he's like, I don't know how to handle these things. So again, some of those things can be taught. So that's the other thing, is sometimes people are like, don't try to teach me anything. What do you think, you're better? It's not about being better. Sometimes we need to be taught skills. You wouldn't expect your doctor never to have been taught the skills of being a doctor, right? So if you've never had the chance to learn a lot of these skills, this therapy really helps you do that. So DBT is active. If you're in the, and DBT is a two-part therapy. You should have individual meetings with your therapist, and in that individual time, that's where you really explore what the patterns are, And your therapist will role play with you and be very active with you and teach you pro-social skills and help you manage those out of control emotions, whether they're from trauma or from a certain mental health diagnosis or from addictions. Because addictions can make you look like a lot of things when you're in treatment, right? So in that individual therapy, you get a lot of work doing that. And it emphasizes problem solving, dealing with, first of all, the self-destructive behaviors, the self-injuring behaviors, the self-destructive behaviors of addiction, the suicidality, right? Those are prime things. But basic social skills are also taught and practiced there. Then in group therapy, which might meet several, once to 3 times a week, depending on the program, we'll focus on different things. 4 components. First is mindfulness. Here's that stupid mindfulness again, right? The deep breathing. But mindfulness is that ability to tune in to where you are right here and right now. It's grounding you in the present. When you ground in the present, you don't get lost in the past and you don't project into the future, because the present's where you can make changes. And it also shows you that these feelings can't overwhelm me. Right here, right now, in this moment, I'm okay, right? And some of the grounding techniques that get used often are like, if you start to feel overwhelmed, it's like, tell me 5 sensations you have right now. Tell me 5 colors you see in this room. Tell me 5 things you smell right now. Hopefully not your celly, right? But all those kinds of things. So you'll have people grounded where they get right here, right now. Because right here, right now, you can start learning that right here, right now, I'm okay. So those kinds of things would be covered in mindfulness. Interpersonal effectiveness is covered in DBT classes. And this is, again, you might do role plays, you might do all kinds of things to show how are we effective with other people. Distress tolerance, how to accept, tolerate, and find meaning in life as it is right now. So I can tolerate distress. This is different than therapies that say, oh, let's try to create a stress-free environment for you. This says, we're not trying to get you out of it. We're trying to get you how to tolerate it. Because when you can feel those emotions, they can become energy and motion. They can move through you as appropriate. And finally, that emotion regulation that we talked about before, identifying and labeling emotions, identifying strategies to deal with them, and increasing your positive emotional events. So those are some of the skills we talked about in communication. We talked about in the, the F-word videos, all of those things. So those things are taught in those groups. Now, therapeutic community, we talked about a little bit. These are things like it used to be Synanon, no longer around, Synacor. When they first started, here's the bad rap on therapeutic community. When they first started, it was kind of a, let's break you down so we can rebuild you in a better way. And they were often punitive, and people compared Synacor to brainwashing. Like, oh my God, it's just brainwashing. They just beat you down. And some people would say, well, who needed their brainwashed more than that person or whatever, or myself, some of the graduates said. But now more things are modified therapeutic community, where everything you do, from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to bed, is privy to the therapeutic intervention, so it's not just how you act 1 hour a week in therapy. It's like, hey, this is how you show up in the world, and we're really going to focus on that. We're going to put a mirror on that, and yeah, we're going to call you on it. So sometimes it may feel really invasive, but again, they've tried to modify that so it's not a punishing model. In the past, it was run by peers, definitely people who had gone through the program. As they got more levels, and they could run the program. It was each one teach one. Each person goes through this process, and then you teach others. Now more professionals are involved in these, like Peer 1 and the Haven. And also the use of medication sometimes happens now. In the beginning, it was kind of like a no medication thing. But now realizing that often people have those dual diagnoses where they need both mental health treatment and addiction treatment, some medications are okay. And that whole idea of dual diagnosis is that they used to kind of put people in a double bind. Well, mental health would say, well, we can't treat this mental health issue until you get this addiction under control. And the addiction people would say, well, we can't really deal with your addiction. You're not welcome here until you have that mental health thing under control. When in fact, those two are often really tied together. Part of your development of this addiction may have been an attempt to treat your mental issue. And your mental issues are, definitely made worse by the addiction. And addiction can create some mental issues. So, I mean, it's all tied in. So most people now are realizing, And we have to do a dual diagnosis. And not only dual diagnosis, sometimes there's more than one thing going on. You might have a mental disorder and addiction, and you might also have a trauma history. And all those things kind of have to be worked with together. You're not going to have all of them worked with at the same time with the same intensity, but all those pieces are going to fit in because you're a whole person. Medication-assisted treatment is the last professional treatment we're going to talk about this time, and then I'll do another section on non-professional treatment. And this is one that if we're in the room, I can guarantee you that we would have people on the two ends of the spectrum, with some people saying, why would you treat an addiction with another medication? That's just stupid. You're just getting people addicted to new stuff. Medication's never the answer. And other people, you'd say, hey, I know some people who are doing okay. They use medication. It really helped them. They got their sobriety. What's wrong with that? It's a crutch. Hey, you know what? Everyone needs assistance sometimes. So what I'm going to ask you to do on this one is put those extremes aside and remember our idea that there are many paths to recovery. You know, people have different ways of getting into recovery. The only path that will not work is the only treatment plan that will not work is the one designed by your addicted brain. Because your addicted brain is only interested in keeping the addiction alive. So any treatment plan it develops, you can switch what you're drinking, you can drink only on the weekends, you change your delivery method of use. Your addicted brain will come up with all kinds of crazy ones that don't really work. But aside from that, there are many paths. So some people have been helped by medication-assisted treatment, and for some people it's something that they don't even want to mess around with. So most common things, I'm going to go through a couple of them quickly because they're not used as much. Antabuse, disulfiram. They used to give out to people like you take the Antabuse, then if you drink, you get really sick. You're going to be, there's going to be aversion. It'll keep you from drinking. Doesn't keep most people from drinking. Here's the other thing with medication-assisted treatment. There is no magic bullet. No magic drug, no magic potion. So none of these, medication-assisted treatment on its own will never work. This is not like if you have a bacterial infection with a certain bacteria and you take an antibiotic and it gets rid of that bacteria and it's done. This is not the same thing. So these medications can assist medication-assisted treatment, but they can't cure. So there always has to be support, there has to be examination of your patterns, there has to be examination of coping skills, all of that, or none of these will take hold. Okay, and that's probably why Antabuse was not successful, because people just be like, well, I won't take the Antabuse on the days I'm going to drink. Methadone is really controversial, but that's one that some people have years and years on methadone, where instead of being on the streets and being heroin addicts, they're raising their kids, they're going to their jobs, they're living their lives, and they're not going through withdrawals, because that's the thing with methadone. It just keeps you from going through dope sick, right? Methadone fills those receptors in your brain that opiates would fill, but it doesn't give you the euphoric effects. It doesn't give you the high, so it fills those spots so you don't go through the withdrawals, but at the same time you don't get the high. Now, here's an argument that comes up. Darla, I've heard methadone is more addictive than heroin. Yes, it attaches to those receptors more firmly than heroin. Yes, methadone withdrawal is terrible. One of my worst cases when I was doing my rotations as a nursing student was a little methadone-addicted baby at Denver Health. I always want to call it Denver General, but Denver Health Medical Center. Watching that baby go through those withdrawals was nothing fun. He got a lot of extra attention because we all really wanted to help him out. So, and we in this country probably don't do methadone withdrawal very well either, because some countries, when people, when they have places where people can do needle exchange and methadone treatment, they also offer other services there, so that when people are ready to change, they can, and they give them methadone, enough methadone for long enough to get them stabilized, to work with them in some other ways, and then they very gradually taper off the methadone. They don't do cold turkey. And we don't tend to taper well in this country. I mean, people who are getting knee replacements were finding themselves addicted to opioids, and they'd say to their doctor, how do I get off these now? Every time I try to stop taking them, I feel like shit. I mean, and they're going through withdrawals. The doctor's like, well, take half a dose for 2 weeks and then half that again in 2 weeks, and then you'll be off. And that's way too quick of a taper. The person will go into withdrawals. So we need to really focus on this, and I notice more doctors being interested in that. So methadone, Suboxone, another opiate meant to block those sites so that they're not available for like the other opiates to attach to, keeps you from being dope sick. And really, people who don't want to go through the dope sick, Suboxone might be their route, right? And again, then you might, if you want to not be on drugs, you have to taper off the Suboxone. Now, the problem with buprenorphine, Suboxone, is that people can still abuse it. And I'm sure you all know, little strips and how much they're for sale for on the streets now and all that. So it was kind of, when it first came out, people were like, oh, this is a miracle. It's going to, cure the opioid epidemic, but it didn't. Vivitrol, naltrexone. We do have a Vivitrol program here. What naltrexone does, naltrexone will actually put you into withdrawal. So if you still have opioids in your system and you sign up for our Vivitrol program and they give you that first dose of Vivitrol, of naltrexone, it will take up those receptors. It'll knock the other stuff off and take up those receptors, and boom, now what are you in? You're in withdrawals. So that's why we do our treatment as you're walking out of the jail, because hopefully you have gone through withdrawals while you're in here and not used anything while you're in here. And then at the end of your stay, you would get what we call a 3-day oral challenge, 3 days of the pills to see how you react to them. Then you'd get a shot on your way out the door that lasts about 28 days. What this does is it just blocks the receptors. So if you take an opioid, that receptor's already blocked, so that opioid can't attach, and you do not get the high. You don't get the euphoric effect from the drug. Or alcohol. It also works for alcohol. Here's the problem. If you don't get other treatment, support, therapy, cognitive restructuring, DBT, all these other things we're talking about. If you don't get other treatment, you think, oh, the shot. See, I have this shot. Now I won't use because it won't have any effect. Your addicted brain still says, well, you could still try it. And you might say, okay, well, I know I've got this shot in me, but let me buy some heroin. And a guy in the story said, I went out, and the first month I was great. I got this licked. Second month, I'm like, this is getting harder. Third month, right? He's like, F it. I don't care if I had the shot I'm going to use. Buys the heroin, does it. No effect. Now he's pissed. He's like, now I'm out my money. I didn't get the effect. And he said, the only smart thing I did was I didn't keep using more. Because if you try to use more and more to overcome this effect, you could easily OD, right? Because your body, the rest of the effects are still there, just not the euphoria. Same thing with drinking. You're taking the naltrexone, and then you go out and drink, and you're like, I'm not even buzzed. See, I'm not even buzzed. But your reflexes still suck. You're still killing your liver. All the body things happen, and you could definitely get a DUI. So does that make sense? That I want you to think before you do that program and that's why with our program at the jail, you can't be in that program unless you also have, they will hook you up with an aftercare. That appointment will be set up. So, you have the shot as you leave the door, but then boom, you're in seeing people to get all the other things that will really make the difference. So medication-assisted treatment can be often an assist, a crutch, a help, but it's not the real deal. One other really quick, topiramate or Topamax, it's an anti-seizure medication that can actually lessen alcohol cravings. Sometimes if the cravings are lessened, people find it easier to get into treatment. And Chantix for smoking cessation. But Chantix can have some other odd side effects. So a lot of people said, well, I'd rather try the nicotine patches or try to quit smoking, knowing that I'm going to be miserable for a few weeks while the cigarettes exit my system. Then there's one called baclofen, which is a skeletal muscle relaxer. And it was, for a while, it was being really investigated as, oh, this might help with cravings. Didn't seem to be all that effective, although it is offered at some of the clinics around town still as an assist. So those are some of the professional things, CBT, DBT, therapeutic community, medication-assisted treatment. In a separate unit, but I'm going to wear the same dress, so you'll know that I did it at the same time. In a separate unit, we're going to look at non-professional treatment strategies. So, see you on another day. Have a good one. Remember to breathe.